Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar, Staying Ahead in the Agentic AI Era, How to Evaluate, Adopt, and Scale Enterprise AI Agents. Joining me today are Jigar Kothari and Will McKeon-White. I'll now pass it off to the speakers to introduce themselves.
Yeah, I'm Jigar Kothari. I'm a growth-focused product leader at Aisera. Currently at Aisera, I help organizations accelerate their journey towards autonomous operation by scaling AI and building agentic solution across enterprise business function. With a background spanning product strategy, go-to-market, customer success, I'm passionate about delivering measurable outcomes and building future-ready enterprise agents.
Howdy, y'all. Will McKeon-White. I'm a senior analyst at Forrester. Thank you all for having me here today. I cover modern technology operations with my group, and for the past 7 or 8 years, I've covered conversational AI for employee services and have been working with the broader group at Forrester covering generative AI as well as AI agents.
All right, thanks for joining us today, Will. So let's start with this first question. Let's set the stage, right? AI agents, the talk of the town, the AI theme of 2025. How would you define AI agents or agentic AI? And what are some trends you're seeing and why they're becoming so increasingly relevant in today's enterprises?
Very good question. We get asked this a lot, and unfortunately, there's still not a whole lot of clarity that most organizations um, have internalized, we'll say, because we see a number of different definitions for both AI agents as well as agentic, and oftentimes definitions get blurred. So I wanted to start off by providing our perspective on what AI agent means, what defines that, and how does it relate also to agentic, because the two are increasingly coming hand in hand. But to put it slightly simply, AI agents are general purpose AI systems to work invisibly on behalf of an enterprise or individual. This means it is an AI thing that can go and take action on your behalf. It can go interact with data. It can potentially make more advanced decisions. It can perform tasks without sufficient amount of human intervention. As far as what AI is usually attached to it, we do tend to see this often referring to things that have an LLM or some other generative model working with them, but it doesn't necessarily have to. It is an AI tool that can go do something. Whereas a agentic system is a little bit more complicated. They seem very similar in terms of the actual language used. That is a true problem. But what agentic means is that these are systems for all intents and purposes that can think, they can plan a little bit better than just an AI agent. These are foundation models, rules, and architectures, and other tools that are all just working together to create a system that is able to go and plan for itself how it should go execute something. So to show a little bit of how they relate to one another, I created a really hopefully helpful graphic because AI agents can do and agentic systems can decide. All agentic systems, like all squares, are AI agents like rectangles. So all squares are rectangles and all agentic systems are AI agents to some extent, but not necessarily all AI agents are inherently agentic, which creates a huge amount of confusion when it comes to actual purchasing. But I also wanted to give a bit more detail on agentic because saying a machine system can think is kind of vague and unhelpful. So I went together and pulled some notes on how actual documentation refers to these systems making decisions. Specifically, these are LLMs usually that, or sometimes there might be some small language model, might be some medium language model that are also part of this. It is usually a system of different language model calls that are interfacing somehow with the description, the topics, the actions that are detailed, and the knowledge that is contained within some tool. Broadly use tool here because that's the industry accepted term and because it's usually pretty good as an arbitrary mechanism. But what this means is it is going and reading how you've labeled certain actions, certain knowledge bases, certain integrations, and the description on how to go and use that. That is fairly straightforward to understand and probably a lot simpler than most folks are expecting, which leads us to some of the challenges we'll be talking about in a little bit.
Exactly. So picking back off of, the challenges that you said we'd be discussing, Jigar, from Aisera's lens, what are the most common pain points you're hearing from customers that are really pushing them toward agentic AI adoption?
Sure. Um, what we see is like we're working in today's enterprise space is today's bots, or I would say conversational AI, is good at like kind of solving the repetitive task. And it does offer a consistency in a very limited way. It handles the data handling as well as the knowledge serving in some shape and form. But I think where enterprises are finding most challenge today is um, where they have built one agent, one universal agent that does everything. And in those kind of scenarios, what happens is that uh, it's not one size fits all. Um, and that's where I think the having the domain specific understanding wins the race in a way that like kind of gives you a very structured understanding on like um, what this request is about and which particular agent within your architecture has ability to understand and respond to those particular query. And I think these are the common pitfalls that we see within the enterprise. The another one is like kind of very well known, which is an integration because enterprises have thousands of applications and and there are a lot of them are still legacy and the previous approach has been monolithic, very siloed, departmental, siloed like kind of the data storage as well as like kind of how they have functioned. And I think today integrating all that has been a real challenge for the enterprises. And the second thing is like kind of the governance and trust, because I'm into Will's point, AI agent and the agentic solutions, they're very exciting, I would say, solution to kind of a lot of problems that we face today. But it comes with a cost if it's not implemented with very well thought through governance and I would say the trust, uh, the trust that kind of brings the security and the privacy compliant layer to the solution. And I think what we are seeing is like there are three core business driver that's underpinning the growing demand of the AI, I would say agentic AI, which is like kind of efficiency based driver, um, efficient effectiveness based driver, and the business agility driver. What do I mean about the efficiency-based driver? Efficiency from the perspective of the like labor and speed. People wants to kind of do more with less. They don't want to continue like operating an old way, having a mass organization that just kind of gives a very limited ROI. On top of it, what they're also looking for is scalability, but without degradation. We want to do more, but not at the cost of the quality or like kind of this quality of the services. They don't want their employees or the customers suffer through it. And the effectiveness from the perspective of that the today I think the lots of agents are built without having a real objective in mind that moves the needle on the business side. Uh, and it's very important for like before the creation of the agent, like kind of having an understand what outcome that we are looking for. I think those are the very key components of like kind of those early thinking in the beginning that will help you design the overall flow of the agent, how it's going to work, and what it's going to like deliver from the value perspective. And the agility from the perspective of that what businesses are looking for is uh, like they're not looking for a surprise at the end of the day when the agent goes in production. They are looking for like kind of very marginal, zero marginal cost execution, to be very honest, that they are looking for um, that it meets the customer and the employee needs with a very little incremental cost. So I think having a full understanding during the creation process, what it's going to cost for each of the agent, that communication and that understanding. I think that lot of also thinking is, or I would say responsibility sits with the vendor to kind of educate the customer on how to kind of go about building and what they can expect at the end of the day.
Will, are you seeing, around the same challenges that customers are running into when adopting AI agents, or what's your take on it as well?
Unfortunately, yes. um, I can summarize this first off by saying AI is hard and it's going to behave in ways that you really don't expect it to. And oftentimes through no fault of the actual models. To Jigar's point, when it comes to like, we want to do everything, we want to have a universal agent right out of the box. That is unfortunately the most common thing we hear for organizations. They want a master bot. They want to be able to do every potential task, every conceivable domain. They want to be doing customer service, they want to be doing IT support, they want to be doing HR, all across the board, usually all at once without that much, I'll say, introspection on why that can be challenging. And sometimes this is just because you don't have the right labels on things. Like it can be that simple. Agentic is reading your labels. So if you don't have all the tools labeled, all the things it can do are all things that it should do as part of a process, like a password reset or getting a customer support. If it doesn't have access to that, if it doesn't know it should access that in the first place, it's gonna fall over because it's not able to do what a human theoretically would be able to do. And another half of this challenge is, unfortunately, a lot of times our process documentation has been fully neglected. We do not have good record of what is supposed to happen at a given time. A lot of times, when talking with folks who cover the contact center a lot closer, they say that the top agents probably aren't following the process to the letter. When you are looking at IT support, chances are most of the documentation or most of the resolution notes is going to have fixed it or some other minimal amount of text or some generic case close notes, just because we've all been trying to optimize to task. We've been trying to do things as fast as possible at the greatest scale, to Chicago's point, because we're trying to do more all the time. And we have not had sufficient resources to document all this. We haven't had a chance to update everything. We don't know what we don't know when it comes to our own organization. And very often, this is a problem people run into head first. And you don't have the people necessary to even start to move the needle on that, which is, it's this vicious cycle that most organizations find themselves caught in. Oh, and one other problem, I would be remiss if I didn't mention permissions. Whenever you have that universal agent that you want to employ, you need to connect it to a lot of different data sources. This is most likely going to include internal data sources. Chances are you don't just have one. Chances are your tagging or your permission set is probably off. Unfortunately, we are very often condemning language models to trying to sort through tagging purgatory. We are condemning them to the junk drawer of our technology infrastructure and ecosystem because we simply haven't spent time or resources or the capital required in order to go and maintain this. And this can come at very real, very dangerous cost. Just in terms of accessing compartmentalized information, there was a number of challenges last year and the year before where people were able to see what everybody's pay was in the organization. They were able to have unfettered access to what otherwise was compartmentalized info. And when it comes to stuff like customer PII, if this is inadvertently exposed somewhere, if this is inadvertently recorded, or you can now access this, because of the permissions are wrong, or they weren't maintained properly, or because you've accidentally inherited admin rights because of the way that a certain tool thinks. These are all very real risks and challenges that organizations are actively running into. One last example I have off the top of my head here, someone who had filed a discrimination case, their name got used as an example uh, by the agent when it was helping another person build materials for training on how to handle discrimination cases. This is It is very possible that these things can commit harm if you don't get help and if you don't properly plan for how they're going to be employed by trying to narrow down some of that initial implementation and making sure that all the information that you have is correct and ideally limited in what you are forcing these things to parse through. Because I don't know about you guys, but there's a lot of mislabeled information in any organizational repository I've seen, very unfortunately.
I concur that we have seen a lot too.
And like both of you, very briefly touched on it already, but trust is a major barrier
Mm.
to AI agent adoption, especially in those high stake environments like IT, HR. So from your conversations in the field, Will, what are the biggest factors influencing trust in AI vendors today, and what can vendors do to earn that trust?
Yeah, very good question. One of the top challenges that we see is we don't know exactly what the system is doing. We don't know why certain decisions were made. Now, chain of thought systems are improving on this inherently just by explaining each of the discrete steps that all the different models are taking. But figuring out why a certain step was decided on or why a certain tool was used in the way it was, that can still be a bit opaque and a little bit hard to unpack for the organization employing this. Um, Especially when it comes to stuff like data grounding and making sure that you are using all the correct data at a certain point. Data grounding itself is fundamental for building that trust and making sure that you know why certain data was chosen and how that was employed and where specifically in the answer that was used to influence. Those steps themselves provide a great just technical foundation for any one of these systems that you're looking to employ. Then this is a little bit more just building that trust internally over time, but making sure you can have humans in the loop, making sure that you aren't fully automating a system right out of the gate, making sure that you have people still having eyes on glass, still having some of the execute authority when it comes to what these agents are choosing to do. Not only does that provide just a time save itself at first, where your agents now are doing less, or your human agents are doing less, or AI agents are doing more, they're doing more faster across the board, but you also still have some guarantee internally that the right choices are being made and that at the very least another human is agreeing with what the system has decided with. And this is a little bit less technical and less process oriented, but I cannot stress this enough. Making sure that you have a good vendor relationship and that your vendor is willing to work with you to ensure that you see success is absolutely critical here. Because as we talked a little bit about before, you don't know what you don't know. And as you are building out these capabilities, as you're exploring the new frontier of agentic, as you're trying to parse through your own organizational tagging, permissions, data sources, you're trying to make sure that it has access to all the two different integrations and tools that it needs, and make sure that the system understands when to use the CRM versus the ERP and what all the custom fields in your CRM mean. You're going to need additional people to help you go and build this out, because chances are you don't have 25 people on hand in order to go and actually experiment and develop with this. And while we do have best practices for conversational AI implementation, making sure you're expanding out the sort of target user base, making sure you're focusing on that user experience, making sure you are starting with a manageable scope, making sure that you are actually double checking your permission structure, making sure that everything is up to date and right so you're not getting sensitive information accidentally polluting. You need to make sure that you have support and assistance with this and that you can accomplish this with your organization and with the vendor that you have chosen, because that, more than any other, even I'll say technical capability I've seen today, determines, do you see success or do you end up with a science project that gets turned off after 4 months?
And Jigar, from the Aisera lens as an AI vendor, do you mind speaking more on, what Aisera is doing to make sure that to ensure that trust and security and privacy that Will is speaking to that is absolutely necessary for an AI vendor to have?
No, absolutely. I think Will brings up great points, and I think Aisera has enterprise-ready traps framework that builds and brings trust within the enterprise, as well as to especially to the enterprise leaders. The trust framework is about the trust responsible, adhering to the responsible AI, bringing explainability and auditability, as well as privacy and the secure layer to it. How we apply this framework in a solution in our architecture and the AI stack, which is much more important to know. What Aisera has done, Aisera has kind of built multiple agents that works around the AI stack, which is the orchestrator layer. So you can imagine kind of when the user query comes, like Aisera has built a proxy agent and that handles all this query, and then it checks the permission that Will was talking about. It checks the trust layer. It checks the all the guardrails are being followed, the intent validation, the boundaries of that particular user, what they can access to, what they cannot access to. On top of it, kind of we are bringing another capability to it, which is kind of the defense against the prompt injections and the jailbreaks. So these are the things that builds our proxy agent much more secure, transparent, and aligned with what business intent and how they want to embrace the AI agents in their ecosystem. And then there is another agent that before, let's just say that it goes through a proxy agent, then it goes through the orchestrator layer, and then and the orchestrator and the reasoning and the planning agents kind of, okay, we have found out an answer. These are the 4 or 5 things that we're going to do in order to kind of fulfill the task. Before they execute or before they serve an answer, the another agent that Aisera has built, which is a critic agent, what it does is it does the risk analysis. It kind of gives you a right level of understanding to the user, as that whether for an example, from the IT perspective, you want to take certain tasks at certain point of time, which may be highly sensitive. You may not want to do it during the business hours. You may want to do it in the off hours. If you are in a finance industry, certain actions that requires kind of some sort of risk assessment before you take an action. So I think there are different scenarios, different logics that you can build around the critic agent, and on top of it, it also brings the proactive notifications before you take certain actions if it requires for you to kind of have an approval or you to require to have a peer review or some sort of kind of in order to kind of the task which is not very well handled to the standards of the enterprise, it can go back to the human in the loop that Will was talking about. So I think the one thing is to kind of understand the problem and then come with a framework. But I think the real challenge Aisera has solved is kind of how to embrace this particular framework into our AI stack and make it in a way that the enterprise feel confident about embracing the AI agentic system, and they would like to kind of build more agents that they feel secure with. And on top of it, Aisera also brings the enterprise along the digital transformation journey through the maturity framework. A lot of enterprises, we feel that they seem to think that they have an understanding about whether they are ready with the data, they're ready with the right business case, they have the right AI strategy, they have the right AI literacy, their organization is ready to embrace. But in most of the cases, they usually, I think, after what Will mentioned, that you don't want to shut down your project after 4 months, but wherever we have seen it, like a lot of enterprises, they have found themselves a little delusional about their readiness of embracing AI and kind of moving forward through this transformation. So I mean, Aisera has learned over the period of time and come up with a framework that that works with the organizations to kind of bring the right awareness. Once the right awareness is there, work with them on the real business cases that brings value uh, to their real objective, and then start small, and then get into the adoption stage. And once you're in the adoption stage, you can start like kind of experimenting with other horizontal use cases. Once you start seeing the success, you can kind of go towards the vertical businesses that can actually give you the business level transformation. But this can help enterprises build very adaptive strategy as well as the use cases, because the space is evolving very fast. And that's the reason the strategy needs to be like kind of as adaptive as possible in order to kind of keep up with the pace and easy to kind of integrate all this kind of exciting technical, I would say technology advancement that we are seeing in order to kind of be in a front position to kind of embrace it. But that requires the right strategy and the right thinking and approach.
And Jigar, to your point, everything is moving fast, right, in this market, especially when it comes to, AI agent adoption. So as more businesses are investing in AI agents, the big question becomes, how do you know it's actually working? What criteria should enterprises use to evaluate whether an AI agent is delivering real business value? And it's not just, automation for automation's sake.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I will say for a lot of organizations, they're struggling with this today. So what we usually recommend is the closer you can get to definitive balance sheet improvements, the better off you'll be. So, for example, for one customer service and success organization, they saw a hard savings in cost per contact with 40% containment of the number of inbound tickets that they were handling. So 40% of inbound requests were fully handled by this system, and this had allowed them to reduce their cost per contact by about 80%, which itself is a very, very good number. However, if you don't also have, I'll say, countervailing metrics, metrics that are held in tension with that, then you might get adverse results. Thankfully, they were tracking other things like CX as well as the overall effort per ticket that customers were reporting. Because if you introduce an AI agent that is able to theoretically handle a huge number of inbound requests, but people hate it, they're not going to use it. They might totally avoid support and they might actually pose a churn risk to your organization. You don't want your AI agent to cost you money, and making sure that you're tracking both the actual revenue implications as well as how customers are receiving your agent is truly fundamental. But you also need to figure out how long this actually takes you and how many people are allocated here. In this case, it took them about, I think it was under a year that they saw this improvement, and they had 10 full-time employees dedicated to this project, both from the purchasing organization as well as the vendor that was supporting them. Similarly, in another IT organization, they can, while cost per ticket is still trackable and something that you should be measuring as part of an IT org, their objectives were trying to figure out how fast they can move tickets through their system, because that was previously one of the biggest challenges. They were able to identify that they're able to move approvals significantly faster. These had previously been hovering above 1 day and had shrunk down to 13 minutes. And they were trying to get significant coverage over a fairly short amount of time. In this case, about 2 years. They had redone their platform a little bit midway through. They had two full-time employees in order to allocate to this. their most critical metrics were how fast they're able to move, as well as were employees happy with the system. Thankfully for them, they were able to see success on both fronts, and they've seen actually an overall improvement in customer satisfaction over time, or I should say, employee satisfaction over time, because things were moving faster. And so the closer you can get to balance sheet improvements is fundamental. But if you aren't able to do that as part of your organization, identifying the most critical objectives to your leadership and being able to show measurable change in those outcomes is really how you can determine just full stop success with these systems. And this seems obvious. This is something that every organization should be doing when it comes to AI agent implementation. But unfortunately, it isn't always immediately thought of, and organizations don't always go into it with these specific metrics in mind. And so making sure that your metrics are clear up front is a fundamental part to ensure that you can work with your vendor in order to see success in changes with those, again, rather than just having a science experiment or more vague improvements to daily life, or to see like some arbitrary productivity number that you've kind of pulled out of some number somewhere that a dashboard is reporting. Instead, try to focus on what the leadership truly cares about in that moment. And ideally, put a dollar sign on it.
And Jigar, from Aisera's perspective, what are some of the AI agent evaluation metrics that we take a look at?
I think what Will shared, that's kind of very much in line with what we are seeing as well. That it's not about the productivity play anymore. It's not about like what is the resolution rate. These are like kind of good to have metric, but that doesn't move the needle from the business perspective. And that's where I think what we are also seeing, that as we are moving towards more AI agent evaluation metrics, the KPIs are also like kind of now, it gives us an opportunity to kind of rethink about like what is the real measurable success within the AI agent construct look like. What we are seeing is like kind of the goal completion rate is much more of a KPI that everybody is interested in, because the agent creation starts with the real objective, real goal that aligns with the business, which we'll also mention over here. And what businesses care about is that whatever the agent handle all the tasks, but what is the like kind of ultimate movement on the goal, the reason, which was the very reason why this agent was designed for, right? So I think that has been the key driver. There are other supplementary metrics around this particular goal completion rate, is like kind of attempt to success ratio, the error frequency, and the latency, the response to the latency, because these are the some of the evaluation metrics that contribute key to the like kind of the agent performance. There are other things that I just want to highlight conceptually, like kind of it really matters for us to kind of have some sort of like an observability, as well as the automated testing and the human in the feedback to kind of keep into the consideration in order to kind of keep the agent move in a right direction over the period of time. And this is very much important from the human in the loop perspective. And there are changes, and as the agent gets mature within the enterprises, um, the slight change can impact the ultimate, um, I would say, the outcome of that particular agent. And that's the reason what we are seeing from the, or I would say the request from the enterprises is like, how can I be absolutely sure before making any changes that it's not going to deviate from the ultimate, I would say the objective why we created this agent. And that's the reason I think Aisera has invested very heavily on the automated test suite that gives the ability to the enterprise to fully test out all the prerequisites of like kind of, and that needs to have like kind of the right results around their objectives. It does a similarity check, relevancy check, and the outcome that they're looking for before the agent goes back into the production or the new changes go back into production. So these are the things that are very much important from the agent evaluation perspective. And one last thing that I would like to cover in the next slide is um, the how we see the agent completion rate. But what we have seen is like kind of the interactions are the one thing. The volume doesn't move the needle. Understanding of of those requests doesn't move the needle as well. Triggering the action doesn't move the needle that much. But at the end of the day, what matters is like kind of how successfully how I have executed the certain task. That's where the real ROI is. And I think that's where we are seeing the space getting evolved. The performance and the evaluation of that particular agent is now being measured a little bit differently as well as we see the space is evolving.
All right. Before we move on or close out, there are a few questions that we got through the chat, so we'll take some time to just address one of them. What does the evolution of agentic AI look like over the next 6 to 12 months? And this question's for you, Will.
Very good question. I did want to also quickly, though, add one last point to the metrics. I apologize. Uh, but I really want to second that detail on ensuring observability and ensuring sort of state and reducing deviation over time. Because as I mentioned earlier, AI systems are weird and kind of hard. In progress in AI systems is not necessarily linear, especially as you are adding more data into them. Now, hopefully, you're not training your own models, but just to understand some of the concept there. AI models are just statistical engines, more or less. At the end of the day, they're trying to help you detect patterns in certain things and then being able to adapt and decide based on those patterns. If you train it wrong over time, if you give too much of a specific kind of data, if you accidentally train one of the machine recognition system that all birds are supposed to sit on branches, for example, because you gave it too many photos of birds on branches, it is only going to then recognize that a bird only exists if it's standing on a branch. And if it does not have a branch, it's not a bird. This is something that is very real and happens, and we're starting to see a little bit of this happening just out in the wild. You might have been starting to see articles around synthetic data degradation, where if there's too much synthetic data being fed into a model, it can kind of fall over. And that's because it can hyperfixate on a specific pattern that you weren't entirely even sure was there in the first place. This is a very real challenge in the market, and making sure that you have good ability to manage the state of your agentic engine is going to be absolutely critical to ensure that you don't suddenly see wild variation in those success metrics and in the actual outcomes there. But to the actual question here, I apologize. What do we anticipate happening in the future? Well, sort of two fronts mainly. One, we'll start to see more and more agentic systems coming online from organizations, either early stages internal or a little bit more public external tests, we'll say. And you can see a little bit of where this is all going today yourself, even just in the public model providers. OpenAI, Gemini, Anthropic, they all have capabilities today that are either like fully agentic or partially agentic. You can sort of see how these are evolving, but we're starting to anticipate that these are going to be now experimented with and released by organizations, and it's going to start to cause problems because organizations are investing significant amounts of time and money into these systems, but they can be a little bit unpredictable. And when you have unfettered access to for all intents and purposes, the thinking engine in the organization or to your customers, sometimes bad things can happen or unintended consequences can happen. And I do worry that we're not prepared for it organizationally in general, because unfortunately, I've borne witness to data that says that a lot of the individuals actually purchasing these systems, the people with budgets, to go and spend money on them don't really understand how they work under the hood, which means they're not going to be fully prepared for all of the weird eventual outcomes that are possible through one of these systems. Um, because you might not have good documentation, just so internal example here, might not have good documentation of, it turns out we've got two terms or two meanings for revenue in our organization. I've heard this from another analyst, absolutely phenomenal example, but they had seen an org where revenue was different for accounting and it was different for sales. And that wasn't documented anywhere, but that's just kind of tacitly known in the organization. And if you have something going and improvising and starting to pull together revenue numbers because you are an accountant trying to do your job, and suddenly you get the sales numbers because there's no reason for the system to know where how these numbers differ internally, that's going to be a problem. And suddenly you've got bad numbers in the accounting organization. Though also, please don't use early agentic systems for anything to do with like finances, financial decisions, or saying yes or no if somebody can get like policy coverage as well. There's a reason why these are considered high risk by the EU AI Act. But the other, slightly more optimistic thing that we anticipate happening in the next year is even more emergence in standardization of standards. We've seen MCP take off and is now supported by most organizations, or I'll say most vendors today, but and also HOA and ACP as well have both drawn significant attention. But we cannot stress enough that standards as of midway through 2025, like MCP, aren't really ready yet for production because there are permissions challenges as part of any of the transactions that you're doing with a tool as you're giving your AI agent instructions to go use this tool over here to go and execute on user tasks, whether that's pulling data or taking changing a status of some ticket somewhere. If the permissions don't necessarily line up, you can result in inadvertently elevated permissions. If the server system for the MCP has blanket admin rights, then suddenly a lot of inadvertent changes are going to start to be made. And so we do anticipate that there's increased robustness of the different standards available, as well as all these problems starting to be solved in the next year.
Okay. Well, thank you, Will, for joining us today, and thank you, Jigar, for all of your insight. So thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar. This webinar will be available on demand shortly.